Pleasure. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad. A bit of a headache, to be honest. So let's see how many people come. Otherwise, good.
Headaches are no fun. I definitely understand that feeling. How's the audio coming through? I'm in a hotel and not with my normal setup, so
It's not bad.
okay, good to hear.
It's not bad at all. Actually surprising.
Yeah, that is surprising. I did not expect that answer.
Do you have agenda? I won't have much agenda points because I'm working on my model, but nothing. It's not at the point where I can report. I think that'll be another few weeks. Oh, Bentley, I thought you weren't coming.
I think that was last meeting.
Oh, it could be. Yes. And thank you for looking at the. I'll leave whoever that is.
Yeah, I'm multitasking,
Yeah.
but I might jump in if I have something of value to say. Have you already? It's just a 1 minute in, but
yeah, no. I was just saying I have a headache, so I won't have much to contribute right now, and my work is proceeding, but not at the point where I feel I can make a report. So I think it'll be next week, or maybe week after at worst. So yeah, let's see if we have agenda items.
The only one I would have is from last week. It was what are the different components you see could build the CDL or the canonical debate. I'd be interested in that. If there's nothing else, we can talk about that.
Yeah, I have my kind of hyper knowledge component list. Now, of course, that's not exactly the CDL component list, right? And CDL plays a role there, and I want to be very clear that I think it's not either or. I think both projects reinforce one another. But my perspective has always been data that is relevant to conversation exists everywhere. Oh, hi, Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hello. How is everyone?
I said headache, but I'll do my best.
Oh.
Michael just asked me a question about what I see as components, or what we see as components. I guess the question is also addressed to Bentley. So yeah, what I was saying is data that is raw material for arguments exists everywhere. And it's important to be able to link to it and see whatever structure in it can be relevant to arguments and make that accessible. That's kind of the protocol federation angle. But from I think we need both a kind of personal knowledge management where we look at here's, my personal viewpoint expressed as beliefs, and I understand things this way and I understand things that way. And we need a personal perspective because you need to think through, like the global thing is overwhelming. So you need to create, this is my little corner of the mental universe and how I understand it and how I make sense of it. On the other hand, you need the global space, and that's what the CDL is, one version of that global space. Now, Tim's vision of the CDL abstracts the personal layer, and it's just how the arguments connect. I'm not sure it can be fully disconnected that way, and that's an ongoing argument between us. But the notion is that we want to be able to have what's CDL, it's giving a canonical identifier to any claim, any argument, I say any concept, and that this can be, we can ask the canonical debate machinery, whether it's centralized or federated, what are counter arguments to this? What are reasons to believe this? What are reasons not to believe this? So you can have a kind of quote unquote the feasibility network of arguments. That's one goal. And I say, because arguments are made of concepts with definition, there's the ontology network and a lattice of definition, and that's another goal. And a lot of arguments are not just logical, but they're about, let's do this so that we can get that. And so there's a whole causal network, Bayesian causal network of, yes, we believe doing this would have this impact and maybe also this other side effect. And well, how do we feel about all of those? And that is kind of the factual basis, not the logical basis. Logical basis is saying, well, if we think that, is that a good enough reason to believe that this is likely? So that's the epistemic basis of those causal links. Or it can be, given that this is likely, how can you believe that this is a good thing when it has this bad side effect? And there's a kind of internal consistency thing, an internal consistency to the definitions and so on and so forth. And that's the logical argument layer of global social arguments. I think in terms of the centralizing thing, if we look at it at a micro level, we'll want to be able to match local thought components, like local data, and say, okay, where does that fit in the ecosystem? And let me put it in the ecosystem and let me know that it gets at the right place. So there'll be all kind of tooling to align, localize, where does that fit? And if it doesn't fit, how do I alter either the causal graph or the ontology lattice, the concept lattice, to fit whatever I'm saying in there and say, I think this concept is missing, this distinction is missing, yada, yada. This argument's missing. So but there'll be tooling to first identify, is what you're saying already there somewhere? And that's one bunch of tooling. And a bunch of tooling, I believe, also is very much needed, and we don't speak about it so much. But it's something Jack and I talk about a lot, is the pedagogical aspect. There's all these beautiful tables of, here are known fallacies, and known fallacies are what? They're either invalid or conditionally valid, usually heuristic reasoning rules, like from these premises, you can or cannot draw these conclusions. And there's the always valid logic rules, which we learn in syllogism and modus ponens and things like that. There's the always invalid logic rules. There's very few of those, actually. Most logic rules are heuristics. And they're valid if and when, and not if and not when. And that's I keep going back to Walton, that's what Walton's about. Those are being cataloged, and in Walton's book, And the latest version of AIF, there's been a reedition of AIF I hadn't looked deeply in at. It's very good. So we have a standard for expressing those are certain argumentation rules. Now, those are pretty abstruse, and getting people to learn about these rules and what they mean, and why is this a good or bad thing, and when can you use it properly or not, and if you identify that someone's using it, what does it mean in terms of what are the angles of attacks, things you have to check, or what you have to verify to say that yes, it was applied properly in this case. So there's a whole pedagogical angle to learning to understand these things. And the other component I think we'll need specialized UX. Like I keep saying, it's not the same logic when you're speaking about the logical layer, the argumentation layer, or the ontological layer. Well, each of them will have its own UX. And another problem, some UX will be hybrid and mix them, and that's fine, but there is a UX that is specialized for certain layers. And there are definitely going to be UX that's specialized for giving you, okay, here's a document, whether it's in the form of text or a map or whatever, that gives you a partial curated view that can be understood in one sitting, as opposed to, here's how this fits in the huge grand network that you'll never end explore in your entire life, which will probably never display as such. Will probably have, here's how this little curated view, which is a subnet, here's how it connects to the surrounding net, like just the edge connections, and then local connections, and then you'll explore from them, and that's fine. And probably workbenches to work on arguments. There's all kinds of concrete tools that I see being part of that ecosystem. We speak about progressive formalization. I think there's going to be a workbench to help, okay, here's a natural language informal statement. How do we make that into a formal statement according to maybe more than one formalism? These are the kinds of components I expect.
Do you mean that as like a teaching tool, or just like a general refactoring tool that like people would continually use, not after just learning?
Yes, both.
Right.
I think both are appropriate. There's tons of work in that field. Because I think we need all of this ultimately, because it's never going to be one, knowledge work is a skill. It's a skill that will have sub-specializations and will have to be learned. And learning to navigate a very rich knowledge view is probably something you're going to learn. Whereas there has to be easier to access views for newcomers, and we need both.
Do you think that the personal knowledge management, like a local graph, I like to call it, I don't know if that's right, but
yeah,
can exist opposed from the general canonical debate? Like, can that be, or does it have to have some type of connection or relation to the canonical debate? I guess maybe stated differently, is it worthwhile focusing just on the local and forgetting kind of about the global until we have more data to say, okay, this is how people are using it, this is how it's going to have to connect, to maybe get something practical in working?
Personal knowledge graphs is happening all the time. I think, okay, I'll let Bentley talk. People are working on it.
Yeah, that I wanted to kind of like go back to something else. I didn't want to interrupt, but to that question, Marc-Antoine's probably correct. Like, we look out at the landscape, and the personal knowledge and the personal graphing seems to be, although not ideal, the problems we're looking at is group collaboration. So that's not a kind of a focus, but also in all those things that Marc-Antoine kind of mentioned, we need some like table stakes, like, you need some sort of identity system, and then questions about, is that identity system a unique single person identity system with verification, or both, or all that stuff. But I think what's helpful when we kind of talk about the features is also to say, well, what's the priority or order of these features? Like, do we have to have them all at once and substantiated all at once? In which case we have a 10-year project to build a system and then it'll come online. Or is it, maybe we need to just have something to where you can take a string of an argument sentence and give it a unique ID and start linking things to it and say, this is a pro of that, this is a con, or this is a better phrasing of that phrase, and then kind of start there or not. So those are the type of things that we're discussing. And also just to kind of be clear, so Michael, you'd said, for the canonical debate lab, and naming's hard, so we do naming bad. So there's the canonical debate system, which is really kind of, at the beginning, it inspired us all to kind of come together, but I think we all kind of found our own niche in the process. So it would be best to kind of have the discussion specifically about that one. But I think your question may have also meant more like the system that we're building together. But the system we're building together may not actually be the canonical debate. And the canonical debate lab is a group of people. The canonical debate is the system. So that's just some kind of terminology. So is your question specifically about that one tool that Tim's mostly spearheaded, or was it just like, oh, this thing we're trying to build together, what are the features we think are important?
The latter. To me, the canonical debate is this global, like the concept in general of the best achieved state, I guess, of the system.
Okay. Yeah, we might that may be a common phrase that we even use often, but it's also to be clear that the first thing we build together may not be the canonical debate system.
Of course, yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
My angle on your question is, okay, people are building personal knowledge management, and at the personal knowledge management level, they mostly use words as anchors. I think that's a mistake in the long run, but I'm very much in the minority view there. But it shouldn't matter ultimately. The question is, how does this connect to the federated view, right? If you want to use, yeah.
What do you mean by anchors? Do you mean like people develop their own definitions for words independently, or like an anchor that...
Which is fine, which they use, if it's the same word as the same concept, right? Which when you're working solo or in a small team makes sense. When you're federating, falls on flat on its face.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Words are value object. Words as identities. They don't correspond to anything else. And again, that's not a disaster, and it's certainly a use case that's possible. But I do believe that at some point, the individual local knowledge graph will work better if it is aware that there's a non-trivial mapping of whatever it uses as identifiers, and it could be UUID, it could be words, doesn't matter, to federated concepts, because federated concepts are going to be equivalence class of. It's not going to be the same identifier. That's necessary. So there will be a translation layer. Now, of course, I expect the federation to do some of the work of the translation, but it'll be so much more efficient if some of it is done at the personal knowledge tool level. So is it worth working on personal knowledge tool that is not aware of federation? Sure, expect refactorings. But of course, it's going to happen, it's going to be a fact, and dealing with kind of federation naive clients is going to be a problem, but it's not how I'm approaching the problem in my design. I'm approaching the problem from the local personal knowledge client is aware of being part of federation and is aware that it has to keep track of its own correspondence table to federated identities.
And and Michael, just to kind of clarify also, I guess, because everything Marc-Antoine said is true, but also I and Jamie from Society Library have decided to do a curated path. And you could almost say that the systems we're building are actually single user systems. They're just built for public. And it's a team of people, so you don't, the collaboration is not built into the tool. It's all done external to the tool, and tool is just the final kind of representation of all that research and doing. So in a way, you know, even though I said that, you know, I'm not building a tool for a single user, really I am, as a step to later on add in the federation into it, but just to experiment with presentation UI and getting sample data for the eventual system and other kind of uses. And I also was curious, Michael, is there a feature set that you think hasn't been explored in that space that you are hoping for?
The UI UX of displaying it, I don't think is mature at all. But I maybe haven't seen good ones, but I guess more specifically, like let's say you have a whiteboard canvas and you have all of your notes laid out, but then being able to dig deeper into what that node specifically means. So high level overview of what's going on, and then almost like query based views, like I want to see this subset, and then that subset based on what's included in it displays differently or more effectively to what you're trying to pull out of the data.
So if we're talking about argumentation and debate, rather than a whiteboard, kind of the standard is an argument tree. You know, Marc-Antoine will say it's a graph or a lattice, but it's hard to kind of visualize that. So if you're looking at one representation, then it's a tree in one direction or another. So Kialo is probably a good example of that. And I agree that the UI could have a lot of improvements, although my improvements have to do with how my UI improvements will be unique to my system, because it has to do with the scoring system that my system's about. So I'm not experimenting, well, but then I have to kind of experiment with the general UI, because I'm planning on making a video series where you'll be exploring the data as part of the video series. So that will be interesting to think about different ways to visualize that. And also someone that was really focusing on the UI piece is Stephen Juris. So he hasn't participated recently, but that's his area of expertise. Sorry, lots of thoughts.
No, that's good. I'd love to see what he's been working on and what it looks like.
I have tons of thoughts on UX that are kind of on hold because I want to get the data structure right. Because I'm thinking graph and hypergraph, I'm not thinking bubbles and arrows. I'm not thinking trees. I am thinking, in a way, something like one view I have in mind is something like an adjacency matrix. So you have statements and a kind of staircase. And then if there's a link between two statements, you have a dot at the intersection of, like, the staircase creates, it's a half matrix. And then each dot represents link between two statements. And one pretty crazy idea I had about adjacency matrices is we can use them to represent hypergraphs easily, because if you have a link between two statements, it can also be represented as a line. So you'd add a row below and then make it a line from here to there. So that's the link between this and this, and make that a new row and make that the object of the next thing. So I can actually represent. That was maybe less clear, but basically it's easy to have a line in a row to represent this row represents this reified link. And then it becomes an object, and it's subject to intersections again, downstreams. You have to have a kind of topological sort on your hypergraph, which is not a big deal.
Are there any like visuals that is this like something that you've come up with that
Yes.
hasn't been like drawn yet, or?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. I have a hard time visualizing because
Sorry, it's I have a lot of writing on this, but I'm not good at sketching, which is unfortunate. So
Right.
these things, either I get down and code it, or nobody will ever see it because I'm not good at sketching, which is a big handicap for somebody.
Try TL Draw. It makes it quite easy.
What?
Give TL Draw a try, or like Excel Draw.
I'm not good at doing it with pen and paper.
Yeah, neither am I. But I think those tools just like, just draw a box here, draw an arrow. It seems to make it, I don't know, easier somehow. For me, at least.
When I draw diagrams, I use diagram tools like GraphViz and PlantUML, and D2 is pretty cool, by the way. But yeah.
So
I use syntax to draw.
Yeah. One kind of thought on that is also kind of like Michael was alluding to, there will be different visualizations for different use cases. So like if someone's coming in and they've never experienced an argument system at all, and just, clicked on a link of some misinformation and like, oh, here's why it's misinformation. Well, you may have to do paragraphs with that, right? Give them an article to read that's auto summarized. But also, an argument tree is sort of intuitive, but not really. But you don't want to have the whole thing open. So yeah, there will probably be quite a few different UIs as long as the data can be represented in that. And like the one I'm working on is some sort of, it's actually not an argument tree. Well, maybe one view would be all the different boxes, but it's more like something you explore, like the old file explorer on Windows, where you can open up nodes and dig deeper. But what I'm trying to represent is how do the pros and cons and the nodes that you're looking at, how does it affect the score at the very top? So working with sizes of lines and colors to say, oh, this one's a pro, and this is how much weight it adds to the main one. And I want it to be so that someone can look at it and they could say, oh, there's a whole bunch of purple. What's purple? Oh, purple are the pros. So now I can see, oh, there's a cluster of pros over here with a little bit of cons. There's cons over here. There's a little bit of pros. Although one of the UIs that I think will be most interesting to explore would be actually a chat UI. And I thought of this before all this damn AI chat shit came up. So it's not, this is several years ago, but it's kind of like, here's the main claim. How much do you agree with this? Or do you agree or do you not, if you want to do bullying? But maybe like, it might be true, it's really true, obviously false. And then the system would pick the pros or cons that are opposing to that person, what that person believes that are true, and unless they're agreeing with what the final score is. So there's kind of a way to surface the claims to them that would be most informative, which I kind of expect people to do manually through the tree. But then I realized that's a really simple set of rules. It's like, show me the things that I disagree with most that are the most true-ish so that I can learn. And if I already agree with the score, then probably give me the pros and the top level pros and cons that make the score what it is, so I can see why I'm either right or wrong. So those are some of the UI things I am exploring. And Jamie also has one that converts it to a written article, but most of the things on there are links. And if you click on the links, the text will then expand to dig deeper into that point, which is something I've been going to toy with, or an article where it's just like 2 sentences, but you can click on a word or 2 words and it would expand the article so you could go as deep as you want to. So she already kind of started down that path as well.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Those
It's quite interesting. Yeah, I'm glad it's being explored, at least that type of displaying of information.
What Jamie's doing is basically resurrecting the old idea of stretch text, right? Which is great. I'm glad she is. We've abandoned stretch text for no good reason. It's an excellent mechanism for.
I've never actually seen stretch text before, actually.
That's
It's interesting. I wish the text being stretched was formatted a little, or like, you know, colored or something, so it's clear what just got expanded. But it's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I was also thinking of some ways to visually show it expanding, because a lot of time, if you just have it pop in, it's very jarring. If you have it type in, then you get a lot of jank across the screen. So from a UI UX standpoint, I was thinking about writing some code that will find where it naturally does a line break, lower everything down, like where the next paragraph is, and visually have it lower, and then have the text kind of just fade in, and maybe even have a background highlight for a period of time.
I wonder what
Makes
the distinct benefits of this kind of UI are over just like a tooltip. Just like,
Well,
the fact that it's
only
in the
go down
same-
one level, and this has unlimited levels, so you could expand in
good
the
point, good
expanded
point.
text. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it has to kind of appear.
that is pretty nice.
and it's important because, oh, that's interesting, Michael. It's important because it makes the overview manageable. And this is like when we're speaking about complex issues, if you show people, here's everything that we know about this, it's just daunting. People will bounce. So telling them, okay, here's the top level. Are you okay with the top level? Then you don't need to dig deeper, right? Or oh, I'm fine with that, fine with that. Okay, this one I'm not sure. So okay, then you can dig, but making it dig on demand is extremely important. And you can do it with an outliner, of course. So what she's doing is a fancy outliner, but still it gives a subjective impression that there's a nutshell thing you can read and be done. And that's enormous.
That's what I want to do on a whiteboard canvas. Just exactly that.
With bubbles and arrows?
It likely that seems like where I'd go to first, but maybe there's a different representation that I haven't seen. I mean, I'm only just barely thinking about this, but that's the overall idea of what you just described, except for spatially rather than in written text. Because written text to me, I mean, it's sometimes really difficult to see, well, what were the relationships? How does this work? It's really dense, where if you could add more visual images and colors to represent this means this and relates to that, to me is easier to sense make with.
I'm in between. My experience with I find bubbles and arrows get obscure fast. On the other hand, I think it's possible to add a lot of visual markers to text. And it doesn't have to be continuous text. Like what I'm speaking about with the half matrix, it's maybe a naive way. There's another way to do it, which is easier. And I've thought about a lot, and I think would work, is basically have, whenever you have an argument in a continuous text, like have markers in the text, like this is a claim, this is a claim, this is a claim. And then you'd have all the claims reproduced in the margin in the order they come in the text, and they'd be aligned. And then you can have lateral arrows showing the relationship. What's good about that is that you only need to show the arrows of the text that's on the page. And then you can have, hey, here's all the important links, like there's a counter argument to that comes 5 pages later, but kind of make it a way to condense. This is the window of what you're seeing, and this is what it's connected to elsewhere. And separate the linear nature of language, because the brain takes up language in linear fashion. We grew up with that, and spatial hints, because we're good at absorbing spatial hints. But I think trying to do a pure mapping of ideas, it's difficult. Now there are things that can be done. I should show. Did I show you CHIOPS? The
Doesn't ring a bell.
No, it's yeah.
I don't remember hearing about it.
I
How
have
do you
two
spell it?
comments of. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
GApps. How do you spell that?
It's something that I worked on ages ago, and it doesn't have any net presence much
Oh,
now,
okay.
except on my site. But it was a very brilliant UX designer I worked with, who came up with a way to represent hierarchies as a pyramid. But what's really brilliant about it is that he would reuse visual elements. So there was no constraint of all the visual elements have to be on screen at the same time. But the way he did it, any path had a unique signature through stable visual elements. So there was no movement of visual elements. It's just that visual elements got assigned a concept. And when you were at a certain path of selection, okay, I've selected this and this child, this child, and this child, and this child, then the elements under it that were ambiguous initially became this, non-ambiguous, because you went to just above and you had selected that element. So you could say, okay, now this one level down. But it gave each path a distinct visual signature with few visual elements, and it was a way to go directly anywhere. If you're thinking of your argument as a fractal, it was one good way to represent fractal information with few visual elements and still give an idea of, okay, here's how much you've seen, here's how much you've not seen. Let me try to give you an instinct. My site has the article we published ages ago on this. Visualization.
Well, he's looking that up.
Yeah.
Michael, one note about, my day job actually right now is creating UIs in Miro, the whiteboard, creating plugins that move data between that and Airtable and other data sources. Is that if a naive way of doing it is not having the position actually important to the data. Like if you see a normal, like kind of force-directed network graph and the nodes are kind of flying around everywhere, it always looks fancy, but it makes the data very difficult to understand and is not usually really useful. So having the X and Y or the relationships have some sort of positional meaning is hard to do with this type of data, but is almost important when that's one of the challenges of putting it in a whiteboard, is that you do almost need a direction to have a meaning to make it actually useful. And then how do you make it intuitive? I guess it's okay if people have to look at a legend. So yeah, so normally when I do it, down has a meaning, it's deeper into the debate. So then it can be done on a whiteboard, but it can also be done in an outline. So, which an outline you can see on your phone. That's the great thing about that.
I guess one of my biggest use cases that I'm thinking about is taking a subset of information, a subset of larger argument, and saying, here, I want to present this to you. I want to share this information with you. And to do that, I think to highlight, like, I really want you to look at this subclaim or the evidence for this subclaim that I know you don't agree with, let's say. And to do that, if I'm constrained by the tool saying, well, no, you have to do this, that, like the display is constrained in this specific fashion, I can't do that. And I don't think, for me, most of the constrained displays that I've seen just don't work for me. It's like, no, I'd like to make this one bigger and this one a different color and do XYZ, all of the things that I can just do in a whiteboard. So I'm trying to merge the two. And I still think with this display, you'd want to say, well, I want it to be directed graph in this algorithm or that algorithm on command, but then also save the state that I had to sense make with and to present to someone like, here's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, and if you get into that, I can build tools to take data and throw it in. I mean, that's what I do all the day. Throw it on a whiteboard with rules based on the data.
Are you, just out of curiosity, you seem to say, are you talking about a subgraph or the local neighborhood? Because those are very different. And I believe in the value, hugely in the value of taking a subgraph. I believe also in the value of local neighborhoods, but I think they're distinct cases and they must be thought of as distinct.
You mean
Yeah,
local
I'm
as in
not sure.
personal and subgraph as in like part of the whole global graph?
No, no. What I'm saying is, let's just talk about global. So for me, what I call subgraph is saying, okay, I want to present an argument by taking this point, this point, this point, this point, make that into a view, whether it's text or here bubbles and arrows are appropriate because you control what you're showing. You don't have so many, and you're just saying, okay, I'm presenting this view of this part of the global graph, but it's more than one element. It's not just local neighbor versus local neighborhood. Is take this node and all its neighbors. That's a local neighborhood, or maybe all its neighbors at distance 1 or 2 or 3, right? That's also a local neighborhood with a more breadth, but it's computed. It's
less selective. Subgraph is like specific. You choose the ones you want to show,
and you can use filtering. You can use rule, but it's rule bound versus explicit choice, and I think both are important. And because explicit choice is about curation, it's about saying, okay, I think this can be understood. It's a point of view. It's a unique point of view, but it's important to be able to express a point of view correctly and solidly. And that means they can be 5 apart, but you've chosen those ones to be part of it. And where I agree with what I think you're saying, Michael, is if the points you're taking are embedded in a larger structure, I don't want necessarily to see the larger structure. I just want to see those points. That, yeah, sure, I agree totally. We need to be able to do selection. Now, the local neighborhood is about saying this point or even this subgraph. Okay, now that I've understood it, how does it connect? What are the counter arguments that were missed by this curation operation? Because any choice excludes something. So now I want to know, okay, how many of those have been heavily under heavy attack? How many of those, and that's the kind of inside outside. Like the idea is you can always trace a boundary around some nodes and say, this is a subgraph that makes sense to me, but okay, what exists at the boundary? Yeah.
Yeah. Joel, can I respond to that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick. I absolutely agree with you. And I think I'm talking about subgraph. That makes sense. Haven't you seen a use case for myself or a value of just a local, what is the point of this? But that's fine. So subgraph for me, and then I believe with the UX of a whiteboard, when you have a claim or set of claims, you can click to expand them. I mean, shoot, there's already a whiteboarding tool for thought that's doing that. I forget.
Yeah, clicking to expand is not a standard whiteboard UI.
But it is standard in many, like for example, if you look at debate graph, it allows that, right?
I've seen it quite a few times of basically an outliner inside of a whiteboard where you can fold the outliner. And I feel like that's just an extension of that. But sorry, Joel, go ahead.
So I guess I was thinking about conditionally displaying like parts of a graph, I guess. And one of the things I like is the idea of you being able to like score what you think is important in the graph, and then like automatically the UI could like visually adjust based on like how important you think each thing is. So maybe like fading away some elements or showing the related things around the score you gave a 10 or something, rather than, I guess, well, if you like select specifically which ones you want, it's more like a yes, no, rather than like, well, I think this is kind of important, so it should be like one step away from the main view or something, but still one step away rather than
But
that.
that's exactly what I'm saying. There's curated views and there's computed views, and they're both important. You need computed views based on filters like what you're describing, and you need curated views to be able to say, okay, this is what I think is a mouthful of information that can be understood as a whole.
I see myself using a curated view, or a computed view, and then adding on to it to create my created view.
Sure.
Like
And vice
query,
versa.
I'm going to query this subset, and then it's missing this, and that.
Sure. Makes perfect sense.
What does
you
the
start-
UX of doing that as a user look like?
Well, that's again, that's not mysterious in the sense, if you have a curated view, what you have really is pin nodes, right? And then you have a neighborhood rule. All nodes of this type above a certain threshold of social approval, if you have this, or reputation, or whatever measure you have, that are connected to the nodes currently pinned, add them. And then you pin some of them and remove the unpinned nodes, and then you add another, you apply addition rule again, and you get something. What I think is important, I say we need both all the time, because when you're in the curated view, you're obviously excluding like a point of view. You're including point of view and excluding point of view. And the danger of that is information bubbles. So there should always be a one click that tells you, okay, here are kind of aggregate attack on any of those points. So you can look at that. Like, how contested is that, and by whom? And even if you don't agree, and these are people you want to filter out most of the time because you really disagree with them, and there should be a way to say, I want to filter out the Nazis, you know. But there should be always a one click that gives you, oh, by the way, this part is really contested, including by the Nazis, because it's good to know what are the controversial points, and to not be in a bubble. So this back and forth between here's what I control and here's what I don't control, which is just outside the global.
Just to clarify, Michael, you're saying like you might start with a computed view and then go from there and add stuff to. Do you mean like not just talking about like when you add stuff to it, you're not just talking about like changing the view, you're talking about like new information that like, I guess I like to separate the idea of like the view and the data. So like, is the data actually changing, or are we just changing the view?
I read it as the
like-
view myself.
I think I started with the view, absolutely, but maybe, I don't know what the word is for it, but ad hoc data, say like, what about this claim in this subgraph? Would this be a good idea? But I don't want to instantiate that yet into the actual data. Like, I don't want to add that to the data. I just want to mess around with it as a potential. That,
You mean
again,
if there was one that multiple people were working on and you don't want to like make the big change to it until you know it's actually good, but you want to work with it separately to see how it looks, and then maybe merge it back or press save.
yeah, I think so, yeah. Or maybe you explicitly aren't going to add it to the data. You just want it there as a reference point of clarification, or I don't know, just a scratch pad for yourself in relation to this subgraph.
Right.
Yeah, and we also, so that's kind of one of the desired things, but also that at a community level, a group of people kind of working on together on building a map, and one might put something in there and have the ability to go, oh no, it's better phrased this way, or maybe it belongs over here. We move this whole node underneath this other section and stuff. So I think we were thinking about having that kind of built in to the actual most of the data structures, but I don't know that that's settled, but several of us, yeah, want to be able to do that.
One of the things I am not a huge fan of the whiteboard is that like if everybody can like choose their structure basically, then it seems harder to like get used to learning a new, or like once you have your structure and you share it with other people, then they have to like learn the structure rather than there being some like common way of structuring, and then it's like easier to learn a completely new thing that someone has made because like it's very similarly structured to you know, all the other ones that they've seen. You know, like if you force it to be directional, then you know, like if I'm looking at this type of node, then like above it, you know, there could be these types of things, and below it there could be these types of things, rather than like, well, it could be left, right, up, down. You know,
That's a perfectly good point, but it's also not that hard to solve actually, because if you have the notion of curated view, which is these nodes, these nodes, these nodes, then it becomes an object in the data layer, and you can have multiple views look at the same collection with different views. So I could view within the view that I'm familiar with.
Except I think the problem with that is that like the person that created the view their way, that can be viewed in the common way, like they will be thinking about it in their way, in a different way that someone like everybody else is thinking about it. So they might like
of course
that still needs to be kind of crossed if you're going to be trying to think about things from the same perspective.
I think either way, there's going to be specialized views for viewpoint alignment. Like there's a moment where here's my graph and here's your graph, and okay, how well do they mesh, and where's the overlap, and that's going to be a specialized view, or maybe many of them. It's not, I don't think that the view in which you think is going to be the same view as the way in which you compare thought. They will have common points, but I have thought about what that could look like, and not being fully aware that it's one way it could look like. I think there's also going to be any of those, but the like again in a adjacency matrix system, you can kind of go with alternate rows of different colors for, you know, from mine, from yours, from mine, from yours. And then as you identify them, it becomes kind of the top of the matrix. You put them at the top of the matrix and becomes a kind of zipper as you align. Okay, this corresponds to this corresponds to this. And then the part that is not yet aligned is always at the bottom. It's a kind of sorting algorithm.
Yeah, and just to kind of mention, I think the philosophy of quite a few of us in this group is that user interface and visualization is like there shouldn't be one way to do this, and really we want to keep things distinct, so you can take this data and visualize it any way you want, and it's designed to be easy to do that. And if there's a UI, this may be like, this is the kind of community kind of recommended way to first be exposed to it or to see it, but I don't think we'll be so we'll be prescribing different UIs for different use cases, but everyone should be in full control over how they visualize it and how they share it out. So we won't ever be like fighting, saying this is the right way to look at the data, and that we want to keep it kind of database and API separate from the UI. So even even our UIs that we build have the same access as any UI that anyone else builds. So that's kind of a basic philosophical kind of belief, I think. So
maybe my claim is that if we have the ability for the end user to use a UX UI to display their data, that would help adoption in this in general. I mean, that's obviously not a fully fleshed out claim, but like something about that.
Yeah,
would not
I
deny
think
that.
it's very important.
Yeah. There would be a UI that's like, if you go to Canonical Debate Lab, or canonicaldebate.com, there will be kind of the default UI, and there'll be lots of arguing about that. But yeah, so that will happen, but also freedom and a lot of, hundreds of flowers bloom or whatever.
I guess I think that should happen sooner than later is maybe my claim, regardless of the, yeah, this is going to be sacrilegious, but regardless of if the data model is settled or anything right now, because you will have to refactor it.
You're not wrong. On the one hand, adoption is entirely driven by front end, not by the quality of the back end. That's an unfortunate fact from my standpoint, but it's a fact. It's just reality. If we don't have a good snazzy UI, and if we don't have a useful UI, and I think that way it's very important to think about process and use case. And yeah, visuals matter, but I'm more interested in thinking about processes and user journeys. That I think is hugely, hugely, hugely important. Like there's a little piece that I've co-written with Simon Grant in the Collabathon about ontological commoning, and he's looking very much at the psychological dimension. But the bare outline of suggested process, it's something I mostly wrote. He added a few points, and he definitely suggested quite a few. But it's about, okay, what would it feel like to go from point A to point B to point C, and to do this agreement process? Agreeing on definitions is what I was focusing on. But what are the stages? What are the steps? And I think that's an important driving point. The other thing I will say, and that way I do agree with you, we do need to think about UX, because my experience as somebody who's also done some deep UX work is that UX has a huge impact on data structures, and like the data has to support the aggregates that the UX needs. So I do encourage parallel thinking on UX issues. Though I support everything Bentley said about it should be independent. But that said, we also want to make sure that the UX is snazzy, because that's also an adoption factor, as Google found out. And that means there will have to be UX-specific optimizations to make it snappy, especially if we're dealing with a lot of data.
And so, Michael, if you wanted to, it sounds like you're suggesting that be kind of a good use of these meetings and our time and the energy of this group. Do you have a thought yet on how to pursue that, or what you'd like to see? I just want to hear a little bit more about what you'd like to do, because we do want to explore UI, like Mark, and actually that's all I'm doing right now is UI, but my UI will be different from yours because I have different needs. I have to show the scoring, and I don't think you have any scoring in your mind's eye. But.
Not currently. My current plan is to wait for TL Draw to release their open source of their beta. They're trying to position themselves as the primitive of a spatial canvases, and so that to me is interesting. I have not enough knowledge to know if they're actually doing a good job of it or not, but I've been very interested in what Steve's doing in terms of just the details he's putting into this. So that's what my plan is, to go there and add like the directed graph onto it. So make TL Draw more graphy. So TL Draw handles the whiteboarding, add the graphingness into it. That's a very crude overview of what I'm thinking about doing. And speaking of which, him and I think Andrew Wiggins of Muse will be on the Tools for Thought Canvas episode next. So that's pretty cool.
Cool. So do you have any opinions about your design that you'd like feedback on? Other
Nothing
than
yet.
we've already kind of given you unasked for feedback. But
And that's great. Like, it's so much information, so much different positions to use, and say, okay, like,
yeah,
this has been very useful for me. Thank you very much.
yeah. So like me, for like a naive interface, thinking about a brand new person coming on, and like half the people are being exposed to data on their phones, and that's why my main kind of primary UI is just an outliner, because it can fit in a context of a expandable outliner. So it can fit in the context of another web page or on a mobile phone. And then if you have more space, you could have it outlined in a different direction in a bigger way. But that, that has different use cases. And now I'm struggling on how do I display the relative weighting and importance of the different claims. Yeah.
One thing I've been struggling with a lot every time I've worked on UX is there's so much I want to tell about each node. Has this node, like, is it something that you yourself have decided that you agree with or not? Is it something that the community as a whole agrees with or not? Is it something that the group you care about or groups you're part of agree with or not? It's different. Is it under attack, which is totally different? Is the attack itself solid or marginal? And then you have things such as, is it something that's changed a lot recently or is stable? Is it something that there's all these signals that I'd want to give about any one concept node that, and I'm afraid of adding bells and whistles until I get a Christmas tree with all these little light bulbs, and it's horrible. Simply put, horrible.
Yeah.
And finding a way to decide to both give the affordance that, hey, this information is available, and we can add, probably selectively and one layer at a time, decorations to each node in, say, a classic outline view, for example, but without overbearing like crazy. I'm still, or this is in the case where there's a text align view, because that's a case for me. This idea is here in this text, and oh, by the way, it's not the first time it's here in this text, it's also here, there, and there, and maybe or maybe not within what's on screen right now. Is it repeated here or totally elsewhere in the text? It's a night, as I said, the aspect of how much information am I pushing, and in an information appliance, all this is useful. In a you're just trying to come in and make sense of stuff, it's horrible. You don't want to expose people to all these bells and whistles at the outset, because it makes the view illegible.
I think it's helpful in deciding that is to think through a user coming in, and of course it depends on someone's first exposure. But if we just take that to it, what questions are they asking when they see it? And like for mine, the first question is these. So I see the main claim, and then I see some claims beneath it in my UI. And I think the first thing they want to know before they even read the claims is which ones are pro and which ones are con. I think because you're either going to be curious on one side of the argument, either seeing you want to read what people agree with you or disagree with you, whichever way you're leaning, or if you're not leaning either, then you don't care about that much. But I think most people come in with something. So I decided that was my first piece of data, or first visual thing. So that one has the largest representation on the screen, and the starkest kind of visibility. And then actually I can't remember what the rest were, was like kind of relative weighting was the kind of the next thing. But anyway, so in my mind, and I think I even have it written down somewhere, I have a list of questions in priority order that I think the average user would think of when they come in there, and then I use that to, and this is standard UX practice, so it's not like I've made that up or anything.
Yeah, I've been through that reasoning, and the problem is I have come up pretty easily with a bunch of scenarios, and I don't have them offhand, but I could find them. It's, oh, if you're doing this operation, this is what you care about. If you're doing that operation, this is what you care about. If you're doing that operation, this is what you care about. So you get
When you say operation, does that include just reading, or are they always, changing?
both.
Okay.
It's true that reading is an easier use case, but even then, but it's true, I was very much thinking, and I think that's really important in terms of very dynamic content, right? New people are coming up with new arguments all the time, or somebody's playing with the definition, trying to make it clearer because somebody asked for clarification, things like that. These are all operations that you want to keep track of. Oh, do I still agree with the new definition? Is this still something that makes sense? Do I think it's really an improvement, or did it actually mess something up? So there's a layer, which is the kind of track changes layer. And, Word makes it a different layer for a reason, right? You're in track change mode or you're not in track change mode, and you can view the changes as changes or not. And the same for the where is the balance of argument you're exploring. And there's, okay, the balance of argument is this way, I disagree, I want to find where's the weakest point I can attack, which is a totally different mindset than I'm just trying to get the lay of the land. Now, it's true that knowing where the attacks are is common. And yes, I agree that this is probably the first thing. But in a very dynamic thing, you also want to know as, okay, there's this new attack coming up here. I need to respond. And there's other information, such as if this is under attack, but the attack is under attack, so I don't care. There's recursive accounts, right? There's, oh, this is there, and look, there's a whole subtree under it. How big is the subtree under it? How big is the conversation around that? How active is that? How active has it been recently? These are all indicators I'd want.
We're technically out of time, so we can shut down or we can keep going. I have some questions for Marc-Antoine, but
go ahead with the questions. I'd want to wind down soon, if not instantly.
Yeah. So, and this doesn't have to be now, but it'd be interesting to hear, and maybe Michael would find it interesting too, is those use cases, are they all as frequent? When you look at them, is that information is like the top 3 or 2 or 1 items common among, or do they completely flip-flop? This piece of information is more important, the contentiousness, as opposed to it's pro-ish or con-ish, or it's the number of claims beneath it, which is something that's important in mine. Because I think you still end up, you don't have to. If you don't have an information hierarchy, priority, then everything gets equal weight and it just becomes a confusing mess. But you'll also have different modes and stuff. So I kind of prioritize the reader mode, and then have it get progressively more complex as the user investigates, but have indicators that they can get more information.
That's discoverable, interface discoverability. Yeah. That's important. Right. There I'm with you. It's important to not shove everything, but give them an affordance that shows them, oh, you could add this, you could add that, you could. And that is standard UX practice. Yeah. Yes.
So Michael, we can, I think this is an interesting thing and something you're passionate about. We don't have a whole bunch of topics for this call. I think we can, maybe we should, show, I don't know. So we could list out, it'd be interesting to collaboratively list out use cases, or to talk about information priority, or.
I'll give one that I think is important, and I'll log off. I think there's a view where you're looking at the consensus positions. Like everybody agrees with this, everybody disagrees with this. Okay, fine. It's ordered by consensus. And there's one which is exactly the reverse, which is ordered by dissensus. This one is polarizing. What are the most polarizing opinions? The ones where most people voted on both sides. Like in either case, the marginal thing is at the bottom. But in one case, you're looking for consensus. What is getting people together? In the other case is what is separating people. And I think those are two vital use cases, which totally change the view.
I think in some cases, if everyone agrees on something, it doesn't even need to be there.
In some cases,
In some
yes.
cases. At 99.99%. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we'll get together next week. Thanks everyone for coming. Apologize for not having my video on.
All good. Thank you for this. It was great. We'll see you next week.
Yep.
Everyone.